We're going to go ahead and start a very long activity called the Galapagos Finch Activity. And what we're going to try and do is reproduce what Darwin did in the 1800s. He sailed aboard a ship called the HMS Beagle, and they went to a number of places. One of them was the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador in South America. And he took a lot of notes on the interesting animals and plants that he saw there. And one of the most interesting ones he saw there were many varieties of finches. Later they became Darwin's finches. And when he analyzed them, he was able to come up with his theory of natural selection. And what he saw was finches which looked like a mainland version from South America, which he thought might have been the ancestral version, which then flew off to the islands. They're about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. And it's an archipelago of islands. And as they migrated to all the islands actually had different conditions, and they adapted differently. And so he could then identify, based on the factors, the geography, the rainfall, and so forth of the islands, which finch actually belonged there, because the finches had characteristics that were better adapted to certain islands, so that's where they went to. And eventually they became different species through what we previously talked about as allopatric speciation. So we're going to do a number of activities here to recreate Darwin's findings, and eventually we're going to pretend that we are Charles Darwin and that we're going to write a report on everything that happened there. So we're going to start off here by watching a video on the Galapagos Islands here.
In 1831,
it's about a 38-minute video here, and it'll kind of take you through the story of the Galapagos Islands. And then you're going to go ahead and fill out this activity right here, which is a video guide here. I've also have the link to the video right down there. And we're going to save this information here, and this is going to be the first piece of information that we'll use eventually to write our report. Now we're going to go ahead here to the activity itself, the finches of Darwin. And you can see if you bring this up, here's a picture of the archipelago of the islands. We're not going to go to all 8 islands. I think there's 21 islands. We're only going to go to 8 islands. I've listed them right down here. And the islands actually are quite different. And what you're going to do is you're going to make 2 different types of notes there. So we'll bring up our notebook first of all. And the first is you're going to make notes on the finches themselves. Your teacher will probably give you a lecture on this, but if you miss the lecture, let me show you where the information was for that. So if we go back here to our finch viewing guide, you can see pictures of the little finches here. They're often named after their characteristics, and we're going to record down here differences. Now, what are the differences we're looking for in the finches? Size, obviously, the type of coloring they have, the type of feathers they have there, the type of claws. That would tell us a lot about how they walk. But the most interesting characteristic that Darwin saw was the shape of the beak. Some are small, some are large, some are pointy, some are blunt, and those beak shapes actually told Darwin what their food source was, and he thought that was a very important piece of information. So we're going to go ahead and record that all down in our notebooks here. So if you look over here, we're going to write some notes over here. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go visit the islands. So now we're going to record down information on the islands. So let's go back to our islands. Suppose we go to Floriana first. Let's click on Floriana Island. This is a picture taken from Floriana Island. Okay, and what you're going to do is your teacher, again, will give you some notes on the island, and you'll record those down, and you'll write them over here in your notebook. Go back here to our notebook. So we'll write some notes on the islands. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to visit each island, and we're going to catch birds. So Darwin had set up nets on the islands, and he caught birds. And then he identified it. In other words, he did sampling. And so you're going to go to each island, and you're going to count the number of birds that you see. So let's go back to Floriana Island. I've got pictures of the birds right here. And you can refer back here to the list Let me go back here to the list of the bird viewing guide here, in case you've forgotten which ones are which. They all kind of look the same. And we're going to record the number that you see on each island. Now, it's very interesting. We're not going to do a large sampling, so it's not terribly accurate. Probably you're going to sample about 10 birds on each island. And what we're going to try and do is figure out which bird actually belongs on which island, which is adapted to each island. Now, you would think that the answer would be the bird you find the most of. That should belong there. Well, that's probably a good starting point, but it isn't necessarily so. Remember, birds can fly. They can easily go from island to island, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're nesting on that island. So the way you're going to do it is go ahead and find the bird which is the largest population on each island, and then see if it matches the conditions on the island. So you're going to go back up here and look to see if the conditions on the island match the characteristics of the bird. If they do, go ahead and circle it. If they don't, go to the next one and work through it that way to see which one belongs. And there are going to be some islands where you'll find that the bird which is not sampled the most actually is the one which best belongs. Now, I'm going to make it easy for you that only one bird belongs on each island. So if you find a bird that belongs on Santa Cruz, you can eliminate it. It doesn't belong on the other islands. And then go ahead and answer the questions here. Let's go ahead and close this document. So now, once you've got all that information filled out in your notebook and you've done your video, we want to go ahead and do a short activity. And that short activity, if I go down here, let's go back to 3. That short activity is going to be this one here, Finch Natural Selection. And this will tell you something about the beaks. And you can go ahead and watch this little video to answer this. All right. Now you have several pieces of information. You have a notebook which has information on the islands, the birds, and the populations, the sampling that you had. You have an activity which tells you something about the beaks. And you have a video guide which tells you about Darwin's voyage out there. Now it's time to write the report. So let's click on the report here. What you're going to do is write a paragraph for each of these numbered parts here. And this will be, write it as if you were Darwin, so you can write it in the first person if you want, using the information that we gathered in all those other 3 activities. Go ahead and write the general description of the islands. Go ahead and tell me something about the finches. You don't have to describe every single finch, but go ahead in general and tell me about the characteristics of finches that you looked at. You might want to use 1 or 2 examples for this, just like you might want to use 1 or 2 examples of the islands. How we went ahead and sampled it. Then you're going to do a dichotomous key for the 8 finches that you have here. I've given you a template that you can click on and modify. These are to be deleted, obviously. You're not going to put down talks. You're not going to put down eyes and teeth. You're going to come up with your own ideas. Does not have to be yes or no. This is just a general template for you to fill in, but you should have 8 of the birds down here. And I've given them letters here. You might want to just use these short abbreviations because there's not enough room to write it in there. Then you're going to go ahead and you will evaluate a hypothesis that the species did evolve by allopatric speciation, which is what we thought. And again, that means adaptive radiation. They went to different islands with different characteristics and adapted to them. Number 7, talk about the possibility of extinction. So we saw that more than one finch could be adapted to one island, and the conditions might change and who might take over then. So you might go back to your sampling data and use something for there. And that should finish up your report. Now, if you're a little confused about the report, because it's quite extensive here, I went ahead and I gave you a template. You don't have to use this, but in general, what this said was, what of the pieces of information could you use to answer each part of the report here? So the video guide, the bird counts, activity Q1, and so forth. I went ahead and helped you out here on all of that. Once you finish that report, then you go ahead and submit it. And again, write it as if you were Charles Darwin. It's best to talk in the first person. It's also best to try and use examples of information that you gathered along the way.